Okay. All right, we are just going to get started. Hopefully, more people join on. So, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We are very excited to co-host this webinar with the Illinois Power Agency. For those of you who don't know us, the Indiana, Illinois, Iowa Foundation for Fair Contracting is a labor management organization that works to educate contractors, workers, and public bodies about the importance of raising standards in the public construction industry. Today, we will begin the webinar with an informative presentation on federal tax credits that public bodies and other tax-exempt entities can receive for clean energy projects. Sarah Duffy and Cassie Rowlands will be presenting on this topic and give details on how you can apply for the credits and the upcoming deadlines. After their presentation, we will do a Q&A. So please drop any questions you have in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will answer all of your questions. Once their presentation is over and we've answered all of our questions, Jodi Frailey on our team, who is, she's the Illinois Regional Manager of Illinois, she will discuss how you can improve public works construction standards with responsible bidder ordinances. Jodi will then also have a Q&A for her presentation afterwards. So again, please drop any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A box. Andy Ware on our team was supposed to present on project labor agreements, but he had a medical emergency this week, so he can't present today. So we're hoping to, incorporate his presentation on a future webinar. So please, stay tuned for any information regarding upcoming webinars that we host. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will turn it over to Sarah Duffy.
Thanks so much, Jill. Um, so as Jill mentioned, I am with the Illinois Power Agency. I'm the Director of External Affairs, so handling our relationships with other governmental entities. So I'm really excited to be on this joint webinar and connecting with local public bodies across Illinois. I believe if my email address is not somewhere on these slides, I will put it in the chat so that if you have general questions about the Illinois Power Agency's work, please do reach out to me. Um, so if we go to the next slide, I'm going to start with just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'll go over kind of the IPA's role in Illinois clean energy development. Um, we're not going to be going into detail on the mechanics and requirements for IPA's incentives. What we're really going to be focusing on is the same types of projects that IPA supports through those incentives are eligible for federal tax credits. And as of a couple of years ago, those tax credits are now available to public entities as well. And so we want to make sure that everyone has up-to-date information, especially after legislative changes that were made over the summer to those credits. And then what the process looks like if you are already in the middle of building one of these projects or have started doing that, what you need to know to set yourself up well to receive the reimbursements that this new mechanism allows you to seek. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just give a little background on the Illinois Power Agency. I know a lot of people in the state have not heard of us. We're a relatively new agency created in 2007. We are responsible for not only annual energy procurement for the default customers of electric utilities, so that's people who continue to just get service from Ameren or ComEd. We kind of facilitate the energy procurement for them. But we also are running all of the renewable energy incentive programs in the state. So we provide incentives for wind, solar, under the recent legislation that was passed in October at the state level. We will be eventually providing similar incentives for battery storage, geothermal. And so we have a real vested interest in ensuring that The projects that we support are built at the lowest cost possible, and so that we can really maximize the economic benefits that Illinois residents get from these projects. So we have uh, partnered with Cassie as a consultant. She's done similar work in multiple other states, really just doing education and outreach to tax exempt entities that are not used to filing with the IRS, that are not used to being eligible for tax credits, period, to make sure that they know that they can now leverage these added financial benefits to pay for these projects. So, with that, I'm going to pass it over to Cassie, who's going to dive into the substance of our presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. As Sarah said, I'm Cassie Rowlands. I have been working on elective pay across a few different states and really trying to help tax-exempt entities, particularly public bodies, ensure they have all the information they need to be able to claim these tax credits. So I'm going to start with an overview. And before I even get to that, I will put this disclaimer out there to say I am not a tax professional. I'm not a CPA, an accountant, and I'm not a tax lawyer. I am a policy nerd who spent a lot of time in DC following this legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, and now I'm working to help entities across the country with implementing it. And receiving the benefits from it. So I really encourage you all to talk with a CPA if you are planning to claim these tax credits for your projects. So what we're talking about here, you've heard us refer to it as elective pay. It's also called direct pay. That's kind of a more colloquial term, and they're used pretty much interchangeably. I refer to it as elective pay just because that is the official IRS term. And if you're looking for more information, particularly from the IRS, you're going to see it referred to as elective pay. As Sarah mentioned, this is a new mechanism that was created with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. And the mechanism allows entities that do not have a federal tax liability to claim tax credits and actually receive a check back for the amount of the tax credit. So you may not have federal tax liability as a public entity, but you can file a tax return, claim these credits if you have put the relevant projects into service, and then you will get a check back from the IRS for the amount of your tax credit. You can combine these tax credits with grants, loans, and other types of funding, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But we're seeing a number of entities combining these types of funds together and getting a very large portion, if not all of their project costs covered. So Sarah was talking about affordability of these clean energy projects, and this is a great way to make these projects more affordable. Depending on the type of the project and the tax credit you're claiming, the tax credit portion can be up to 30% of the total project costs. And in some cases, you can get an even higher percentage covered by the tax credits. And I'll go into those details in a little bit. It's important to note that the tax credits are generally uncapped and not competitive. So unlike grant funding, for example, there's not a finite amount in most cases. I'll talk about the exception again a little bit later, but it also means that you can claim these tax credits for as many projects you place into service, for as many electric vehicles that you have purchased or EV chargers that you install. So it's really a huge opportunity for funding and capital for these projects. It's important to note that in order to claim the tax credits, your organization has to actually own the energy property. So for example, with a solar project, that doesn't necessarily mean owning the building. If it's rooftop solar, it means owning the energy property, so the panels and the other equipment that goes alongside it. If you are leasing or using a power purchase agreement arrangement, unfortunately, you will not be able to claim the credit. It's the owner of that equipment that claims the credit. Another kind of restriction that I'll get into a little bit later is if your eligible project costs are entirely covered by restricted grant dollars that are explicitly tied to the purchase of that energy property. So again, if you get a grant that says it is specifically for those solar panels and it covers the entire cost of it, you cannot claim the tax credits. I'll go through an example in a little bit. And then there are some deadlines, and your ability to claim the tax credits is time bound. So generally, we're looking at projects that were placed in service in 2025 can still claim the tax credit, but those placed in service 2024 or earlier, those deadlines have now passed. So I know that here we're talking to a lot of folks in public bodies, so local, regional governments, and the like. All of you that are in that category are eligible to use elective pay. That also includes any agencies and instrumentalities of these governments, such as school districts, transportation authorities, water authorities, housing authorities. There are also other tax-exempt entities that are eligible to claim these tax credits, including community colleges and public universities, rural electric cooperatives, nonprofits, houses of worship, and a number of others that fall into a kind of catch-all basket there. I will be sharing these slides, so you will be able to click on these links once you receive them. And the link there at the bottom is to the IRS FAQ on elective pay. They provide a lot more detail there about the types of eligible entities. So if you have any questions about where your organization fits, it is likely answered there. I was just going to see if folks wanted to put in the chat if we could get a sense of the types of entities you all are representing, and whether you have any projects that you're placing in service or have already placed in service. It would be helpful for us to just get a sense of that as we go forward here. The types of projects that I'm particularly talking about are those like solar power, geothermal HVAC systems, battery storage, EV charger installations, and EV purchases. These are kind of the most popular projects that are being used with elective pay. There are others out there, things like hydrogen production, carbon capture sequestration, but we really don't see a whole lot of elective pay eligible entities like public bodies very frequently involved with those types of projects. Common investments that many public bodies and other tax-exempt entities are pursuing, such as energy efficiency measures, weatherization, and air source heat pumps for certain buildings, are actually not eligible for elective pay, unfortunately. There is a detailed fact sheet from the IRS that outlines the types of tax credits and uses of those tax credits, the types of projects that you can claim these credits for, and I've linked that there at the bottom. But primarily we are seeing solar, geothermal, some batteries, EV chargers, and EV purchases. So you'll see those throughout my examples today. And the first example here is Jonesboro Elementary School in Illinois. We spoke with them recently. They installed a 300 kilowatt solar array at the end of 2024. The cost of installing that array on the school was $982,000. They went through the process of filing a tax return and claiming an elective payment, and their reimbursement was for $393,000, so right around a third of the project costs. You'll see here that I've noted they are using the Illinois Shines program, and they got some utility incentives as well. And to date, they've already received $500,000 from those additional incentives. So combining those two together, you can see that it's been just over a year and they've already almost paid off that project. Their electric bill savings are ranging anywhere from $1,600 to $6,500 a month. And as you can see kind of by the quote there, their superintendent really feels that this was a game changer and kind of a no-brainer for them. So this is just a great example. You can see how much elective pay can really bring down the cost of a project. And I think it's helpful to see kind of in real terms how this is really beneficial. Another school district, Woodridge School District in Illinois, they have already installed solar on 4 schools. They placed those in service in early of 2024, and their elective pay reimbursement was over $1 million. So they are installing solar on the 3 remaining schools in their district this year, and they anticipate another $1 million check coming back to them from the IRS once they file their tax return. They're also using the IPAs, Illinois Shines incentives, and their payback period, they're looking at 7 years. And that was pretty significant. They have reported that their electric bills will be cut by 95% now that they've got solar on all of their buildings. So their superintendent was telling us that, this is not only financially viable, or the elective pay reimbursements is not only making these projects financially viable, but actually going to be a source of positive cash flows in the very near future. So I thought that was a really great way to look at it. Okay, so we've talked about the types of eligible projects and the entities like yourselves that can claim them, but now I'm going to talk about the most popular tax credits that elective pay entities are using. You kind of have to match up the tax credit with the type of project that you've placed in service. So starting with the more simple credits, the first 2 on here are related to electric vehicles. So the first one, the commercial clean vehicle credit, is for anyone who has acquired an electric vehicle for their organization's commercial use before September 30th of last year. So this could be passenger vehicles, it could be electric buses, it could also be for plug-in hybrids as well. You have to do an analysis relating to the size of the vehicle, the cost of the vehicle, and some other factors, but you will likely be getting a $7,500 credit for electric passenger vehicles, or $40,000 for the very large buses, electric garbage trucks, electric fire trucks. Those are the 2 maximum values, and usually that is kind of where that 3-step analysis lands. Again, this, because of the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act over the summer, this is now limited to vehicles that were acquired before September 30th of last year. They do not have to have been placed in service before that date, just acquired. The second credit here is for alternative fueling infrastructure, so most popularly electric vehicle chargers. It is based on the size of the investment in the charger. So you're looking at total eligible costs of installing the charger and the equipment. And then it can be up to 30% of the total project cost, maxing out at $100,000 per port on the charger. It is limited to certain geographic areas. And there are requirements for using prevailing wage and apprentices to install those chargers. If those requirements are not met, then you will only get a 6% credit. In order to claim this credit for these kinds of installations, the chargers have to be installed by June 30th of this year. So that is an upcoming deadline just to be aware of if you are planning on installing any chargers and want to claim this credit. The third credit is more of a catch-all for clean energy generation. This is the investment tax credit. You may have heard of that, it described that way. It is a tax credit, again, based on the investment that your entity has made in the project or the eligible costs of the project. Again, we're looking at up to 30% for the kind of base credit value. And this one, for very large projects, 1 megawatt or larger, will also need to follow the labor requirements that I mentioned earlier. There are a number of other requirements that come as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, pass it over the summer, and I'll get into those details a little bit later because I'm going to focus here on this investment tax credit for a little bit since this is really probably the most popular tax credit. So at the top here, I have the types of projects claiming the investment tax credit, like solar, geothermal, or energy storage. Projects under a megawatt are always going to start with a base credit of 30%. Projects, again, over or equal to 1 megawatt will be at 6% if they don't comply with rules around paying prevailing wage and using apprentices. So smaller projects are typically what we see public bodies installing, but there are some exceptions. So it's likely that your organization will probably be looking at a 30% credit automatically. But if you do have one of those larger projects, this is something that you definitely want to be thinking about early on in the procurement stage so that you're selecting a contractor who is able to pay prevailing wage, use apprentices, and report to you and provide documentation so that you're able to confidently claim this credit and have that documentation available should you get audited. You are going to be filing a tax return with the IRS, and therefore they can audit you. So you want to make sure documentation is up to par. So that is how the base credit is calculated for these projects using the investment tax credit. And again, these are just some examples: solar, geothermal, energy storage, wind would also fall into this category, hydropower, a few others. At the bottom, the EV charger credit is treated very similarly to the large projects I mentioned above. All EV chargers, regardless of size, need to comply with those prevailing wage and apprenticeship rules in order to get the 30% credit. Otherwise, they're only going to receive a 6% credit. So again, that's something to talk about with your installer early on when you're talking about purchasing this equipment and getting it installed. Now, those 6% or 30% base credits are kind of the minimum value that you're going to get for each project. There are bonus credits available that can be stacked on top of the investment tax credit in order to increase that amount beyond the 6 or 30%. So the first bonus credit is called the Energy Communities Bonus Credit. This was really created to incentivize investments in clean energy in locations that had former fossil fuel infrastructure, such as coal-fired power plants that have maybe shut down and have high unemployment rates. Luckily, there is a map where you can take a look and see if your area falls within this kind of energy community designation. If it does, then you get another 10% on top of a 30% bonus credit. If your project is only getting a 6% credit, if it's one of those larger projects and it does not comply with the labor rules and it's getting a 6% credit, you're only going to get a 2% bonus, but you still get the bonus. But let's assume a 30% credit for a small, say, solar project. If it's placed in service in one of the shaded areas in pink or green on this map, then it'll automatically be eligible for a 40% credit. This map does change over time, so it's important to check back. And brownfield locations can also be considered an energy community. Now, of course, brownfield designations are case specific, so they are not located on this map, but that is another way to get to a 40% credit instead of a 30% credit. The second bonus credit is called the domestic content bonus credit. So there are minimum requirements here for certain components of the project equipment being made in the United States. There are a number of rules that I encourage you to check out and talk to your installer about if you think this is something that your project could potentially claim. It also, for the very large projects, again, that 1 megawatt threshold becomes a penalty. So if you have a very large project you're placing in service over 1 megawatt and it does not meet the domestic content requirements, um, it actually reduces the amount of your credit. So if the project is starting construction, it started construction last year and it doesn't comply and it's over 1 megawatt, you're only going to receive 85% of your credit amount. If it starts construction this year and doesn't meet those requirements, you're not going to receive a credit at all. It's actually reduced to zero. Um, so that's something to look at if you have a large project. And finally, the third bonus credit available is for small solar or wind projects, so under 5 megawatts, in low income and tribal communities. This is the exception to the rule about being uncapped and not competitive. So this bonus credit actually requires entities to make an application to the Department of Energy. That application period is open right now through March 3rd. So if you are in one of these areas, again, there is a map for this, then it might be something you want to look further into. When you're applying for this credit, you do need to have a contract already with the solar or other type of company who will be working on the project. And you cannot have placed the project in service yet. So you have to kind of have started a little bit, made some progress on the project, but you can't place in service yet. And you cannot place in service until you get an answer back from the Department of Energy, which can take a couple of months. So you kind of have to have the right project in the right location and at the right stage, but this could result in another 10 or 20% added to your credit. So these are just bonus credits. They cannot be claimed by themselves, but again, they can be added on top of that investment tax credit. And they kind of are more and more reachable as you go down this list. Energy Communities bonus credit is very popular and is very easily claimed just by providing, the location, latitude, and longitude of your project. Domestic content bonus credit is a little more challenging, but you can get certain documentation from the manufacturer, for example, to show that you have met these requirements. And then the Low Income Communities Bonus Credit Program, again, you have to apply to the Department of Energy, but if you're in the right location at the right time, it could be a really great opportunity. Now that we've kind of covered the details of the tax credits, I just want to talk a little bit about combining these tax credits with other funding sources, because this is extremely popular, combining tax credits with grants or bonds, and want to make sure you're all aware of the restrictions around that. So there have been a lot of grants for clean energy projects over the past couple of years, and it's important to note that there is a rule called the no excess benefit rule. So when you're combining tax-exempt grant funds with tax credits, those two things together cannot exceed the eligible project cost. So this is talking specifically again about restricted grants that I mentioned earlier. Grants that are provided specifically for the purchase of this eligible energy property. So the solar panels or the EV charger itself. If it is restricted in that way, it triggers this rule. And so you can combine the two. I've put an example down here. If you have, say, a $100,000 project and you're combining a 30% tax credit with a grant that's worth 70% of the project cost, you've perfectly aligned your capital stack here. You are using the tax credit and the grant to cover 100% of your project costs. If you were actually eligible for a 40% tax credit, that would bump the capital stack over the total project costs, and the IRS would actually take that excess off of your tax credit, and you would only get the 30% anyways. So it's something to think about when you're looking at projects that have received grant dollars or donations and might kind of reduce your tax credit. You want to try to maximize that. And if you're able to use grant dollars elsewhere, then that could be advantageous. The second important consideration, especially for public bodies, is using tax-exempt bonds to finance a project. The IRS, again, just like the no excess benefit rule, really wants to limit kind of double dipping with tax-exempt funding. So projects that use tax-exempt bonds automatically get a reduction equal to the percentage of the project financed with those tax-exempt bonds. It maxes out at 15%. So, for example, if you use tax-exempt bonds to cover 10% of your project costs, you're going to have your tax credit reduced by 10%. If you use tax-exempt bonds to cover 25% of your project costs, it's only going to be reduced by that maximum 15%. So again, something to take into account when you're planning ahead. Now, there have been a number of changes to the investment tax credit specifically after the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I mentioned the changes to the credits for electric vehicles and for EV chargers. The changes to the investment tax credit are a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to break them down here. The first is that there are new expiration dates for projects that want to claim the investment tax credit, primarily for wind and solar projects. So for projects that begin construction after July 4th of this year, they're on an expedited time frame. They need to then be placed in service by December 31st of 2027. Otherwise, they can't claim the credit. So if you have projects, wind and solar projects that will be starting construction in the second half of this year, just make sure that you're able to place in service before the end of 2027. If they begin construction before July 4th of this year, you do not need to place in service by that date. You just have to place in service within 4 years. For things like geothermal, HVAC systems, and battery storage, you actually can claim the investment tax credits through 2035. So those deadlines have not changed. Now, there are some more restrictions around clean energy projects, and this is not limited to wind and solar. This applies for things like energy storage as well. This is the prohibited foreign entity rules, or you might have heard them referred to as the foreign entity of concern rules. These are restrictions for projects that involve entities and materials from prohibited countries: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. There are 3 prongs to those restrictions. The first is that entities that themselves are considered prohibited foreign entities from those countries cannot claim the tax credits. So as public bodies, you all are very unlikely to fall into that category. The second category is entities that make payments to prohibited foreign entities from these countries. That does mean, that does include bond payments. So if there are bond payments made to any entities that are considered prohibited foreign entities from these countries, that means you will not be able to claim the tax credit. And finally, the most kind of significant rule here, I think, for you all is projects that use materials and components made by companies owned by prohibited foreign entities of these countries. So if a solar project uses solar panels made by companies that are owned and operated in these countries, then that disqualifies the project from claiming the tax credit. There is a minimum or a maximum threshold here. It's not that any use of those components disqualifies you from claiming the tax credits. There is a maximum amount. I think it's 40 or 50% around there. The details around how this actually works are still kind of up in the air, because while these rules are in statute and they are law, the IRS has not yet issued regulations explaining how exactly entities are expected to implement these. So those are still to come. The third that third regulation around materials and components does not apply to projects that started construction uh, before this calendar year. So if your project started construction before December 31st of last year, you don't have to worry about that third materials and components regulation. You likely will have to worry still about the being a prohibited foreign entity yourself or making bond payments to those types of entities, but just not that components regulation. The good news is that these rules actually don't apply to geothermal HVAC systems. Those were exempt from these rules. But like I said, things like solar, wind, battery storage, and other types of projects, this does apply to. So talk to your installer about it, ask questions. This might be something to incorporate into bidding documents in future. Definitely a really important consideration for projects starting construction this year and next year. So a lot of what I've talked about already, the tax credits, how you might calculate how much you might get back, are all really kind of things to think about ahead of time. But this process piece is really important for those who have already placed projects in service, and want to think, okay, or want to know, okay, what do I do next? So there are 4 key milestones in between placing your project in service and actually receiving your check. So you place the project in service, that's step number 1. Number 2 is completing an online process called pre-filing registration. So you will go through an online portal on the IRS website and enter some project information. The IRS recommends doing that 120 days before you file your tax return. They want to have that 4 months to be able to review your online registration and issue you a project ID number. You'll then need that ID number to put it on your tax forms and file an actual tax return. And then finally, you'll receive the check from the IRS. They have said it should take 45 days to receive the check after you file your return. I'm typically seeing right now around 60 days. And then if it is beyond the 45 days, you will actually receive interest from the IRS. So there is, again, a little bit of a silver lining there if your check comes more than 45 days later. So in between these 4 milestones, there are a number of steps you need to take. After you place in service, you'll want to identify all of the eligible projects and the tax credits that they match up to. An important factor for public bodies here is that you have to identify all of the projects that fall under your organization's employer identification number. So if you have, a Department of Public Works and you have the Parks Department and all of these departments that fall under, say, City of X, under that one employer identification number, then you'll have to collect the information for all of those projects and submit them together. So it might require some coordination among departments once you understand which of them fall under that EIN. Once you have those together, you'll want to determine your tax year because, like I said, the IRS wants you to complete the online pre-filing process 120 days before your tax return is due. I'll talk about exactly what that looks like next. So if your organization has filed tax return in the past, then it's already established a tax year with the IRS. Local governments and school districts, public bodies really don't have to do this. Nonprofits, they submit a 990 each year, they've established a tax year. But your organization, unless it's used elective pay in the past, probably has not established a tax year. but you'll want to check with your finance department just to be sure. If your organization has not established a tax year, then you can choose to file either on a fiscal year or calendar year basis, and that will be your tax year. You can only claim tax credits for the projects that were placed in service in the most recent tax year. So remember, I said at the beginning, there are some deadlines, and projects placed in service in 2024 have kind of missed those deadlines. You're looking at, for example, if the organization has a calendar year tax year, you're looking at any projects placed in service January 1 to December 31st of 2025. And those will be the ones that you're going to go put on your pre-filing registration and on your tax return for claiming the credits. Now, because nothing is simple here in the tax realm, you have to determine your filing deadline, and that is determined based on the end date of your tax year. So it is not April 15th like personal taxes. It is determined by the last day of your tax year. So you have to look at the end date of your tax year, and then you look 4.5 months forward, or the 15th day of the 5th month following your tax year. So I've got some examples here, and you can refer back to this later depending on when your tax year is. So looking at the first line, I've got calendar year as an example tax year. Your filing deadline is the 15th day of the 5th month following December 31st. So you'll see in this column here, filing deadline is May 15th. The IRS, again, wants you to go through that online pre-filing process 120 days before that, so that would be January 15th. Now, if you're thinking we're past that, I placed a project in service in 2025, have I missed the boat here? No, you have not. This is a recommended deadline. It is not something that is a hard and fast deadline, and I'm seeing those complete the pre-filing registration right now get their ID numbers back from the IRS in just a few weeks. So plenty of time to then reach that May 15th filing deadline. Now, if you're a, say, school district or other type of public body that might have a July to June tax year, you'll see here that the 15th day of the 5th month following the end of that tax year, June 30th, that filing deadline is November 15th. Counting backwards those 120 days, you'll want to start thinking about pre-filing registration through the IRS portal in July. And you can look again here for October to September tax years. Those are looking at February of next year and looking at the pre-filing registration at the end of this year in October. You can request a 6-month extension to your filing deadline, but you have to actually submit a form to request that. That would then push out your filing deadline by 6 months, and then, of course, the associated pre-filing registration dates by 6 months as well. It's better if you don't need the 6-month extension, if you can get everything in by the original deadlines, because then you'll get your check sooner. So just try to plan ahead on that. This here is a lot of information about the data and the documents you'll need to go through that pre-filing registration process on the IRS website. I'm not going to go through it all. I really just wanted to provide you this as a reference to look back to and guidance on information that you'll need to collect. Here's a link to the pre-filing portal on the IRS website, and they have a guidebook with screenshots of each page of that portal to help walk you through that. So that's a helpful resource as well. Once you complete the pre-filing registration process, you want to save a copy of your registration so you have those details saved. You'll have to log back into the portal and check for those ID numbers because the IRS does not email them to you. Once you get those ID numbers, you'll provide them to the CPA you're working with, who will put them on your tax forms and file your tax return for you. the tax return, like I said, will be filed, and you should expect to see the check from the IRS between 45 and 60 days later if it was electronically filed. Some public bodies have done paper filings, just mailing it into the IRS in the past, and that takes significantly longer. So, really recommend working with a CPA to electronically file. If you have not seen any letters or any check come from the IRS after about 60 days, you can call the IRS nonprofit phone number and get a status check on your return. Um, then you will receive the check. Again, the 45 to 60 days could be longer if it's a very busy filing time. If you're right around May 15th, there's a lot coming up in the system. I will say, if you get a letter from the IRS after you filed, it may say that you're not eligible. It could say, if you've, filed an extension, it could say, oh, you missed the deadline because they processed your tax return before they processed your extension. I've seen that happen. There are a number of kinks in the system here that are still being worked out because uh, tax returns for tax exempt entities is still something the IRS is just trying to figure out within its system. And so sometimes there's a few hiccups, but really it's not something that you should be concerned about. You will just have to call the nonprofit number and get more information, and they'll take a second look at your return. So finally, I will round out here about some of the support that IPA is providing. Like Sarah mentioned at the beginning, we are conducting outreach, providing education and technical assistance. So if you're an eligible entity in Illinois or an approved vendor working with these entities, we'd love to help you if we can. You can contact us through the IPA's Contact Us website. I've linked it here. And we also are putting more resources on the IPA website. We've got some FAQ, we've got a fact sheet, we've got some other slides and webinars, and we will also be working with Lawyers for Good Government for any complex cases that need some tax lawyer advice. So we're happy to refer you over to them as well. And then finally, the Illinois Finance Authority, acting as the Illinois Climate Bank, offers a bridge loan. So this is upfront capital for your project to be paid back once you receive your elective payment. So obviously, you don't receive your check from the IRS until the project is placed in service, your tax year's ended, and you have filed your tax return. So if you need that upfront capital early on to get your project going, you can request this bridge loan from Illinois Finance Authority, and the repayment happens once you receive your tax credit. All right, I am going to stop there for some Q&A, and happy to have some discussions and hopefully hear about some excellent projects.
Thanks, Cassie. Just everyone, FYI, thank you for whoever put this in the questions box. It looks like the chat was disabled, so unfortunately people weren't able to put the entity they were with and whether they had a project in the pipeline. So maybe if people have questions, if you could just start with what organization you're with and whether you have an active project that your question is regarding.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was happening in the chat. I did just open it, so also you can now hopefully add stuff to the chat, but please do it in the Q&A as well. Please ask questions. Don't be shy. Cassie and Sarah are here. Thank you so much for that great presentation. It was really informative. One of the questions, it wasn't really a question, but Josh also just said that he just wanted to thank IPA for taking some time today to explain and break down the VITAL program. So I know everyone on is appreciative. But please add your questions. Cassie and Sarah will send me their presentation. So later on, I will also email it out so you can click on all of those great links that she added. But yes, any questions, please drop those now.
And we can stay until the end in case, as people think through during Jodi's and if there aren't questions immediately, that's fine.
Perfect. Thanks, Carla. Glad you thought that this presentation was informative. Well, Jodi, do you want to start your presentation? And then please, you guys keep coming up with questions. Sorry again about the chat um, being disabled earlier.
Okay. Good morning. Where is my share screen?
Hopefully at the top
Oh my gosh. Here we go.
or at the bottom, there's a share button.
There it is right here. We just did this. So, okay. Okay. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yep.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time today. My name is Jodi Frailey. I'm the regional manager in Chicagoland of field operations for the Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa Foundation for Fair Contracting. We are a nonprofit labor management organization that is committed to support and promote what we call a level playing field in public works construction. Our organization has been around nearly 25 years now, and it was established to protect the public interest by increasing taxpayer value at a local level while restoring, or in some cases, establishing high construction standards. We accomplish this by doing this a number of different ways, but number one, we track and monitor nearly $8 billion worth of public construction annually throughout our three states. Pardon me. Over 7 billion of that 8 billion was just here in the northern third portion of Illinois alone. So, we attend bid openings. We flag what we call bad actors or non-responsible contractors. We find out when they are plan holders for projects that we're looking at, and we will follow up by attending bid openings and meeting public officials who are active in the bidding process and having conversations with them once we know that a contractor is what we call non-responsible or a bad actor. We will protest bids in certain situations if we believe that a contractor is not necessarily responsible, and we will provide public bodies information that we have obtained through public channels only. Any information we share is strictly through public record of projects that have been done and any kind of references from other public bodies to maybe get in touch with the public body that is currently in the bidding process to let them know whether or not a contractor did good work for them or if they had any issues. We also monitor projects to ensure workers are safe and getting paid the correct rates. We do all of that to obviously, as I mentioned, to establish or promote fair contracting. But the most proactive way that we can best protect local government is through encouraging responsible bidding on the early onset of all of this. All of that comes, after the bidding process is already done. We monitor and all of that, like I mentioned. But the most proactive way we can ensure that public bodies are getting the best value with their taxpayer money on public works construction is putting together what we call a responsible bidder ordinance, or basically a procurement policy that puts together criteria for contractors to meet even before they can bid on a project. So, the Illinois Procurement Code does require communities to competitively bid, and then to award to the lowest responsible bidder. Though the procurement code does have quite a bit in it, it doesn't necessarily it's too open for interpretation on some of the requirements for the bidders. So we are promoting, and we have been for quite some time, putting together these procurement policies for public bodies to have in place to determine more specific criteria to determine the responsibility of a contractor or not. Because honestly, when an unqualified or unsafe contractor builds a school or a new road or any other building with taxpayer funded or with taxpayer money, your taxpayers will end up having to pick up the bill if anything goes wrong with a project, if it takes too long, or if somebody gets hurt, God forbid. So they have to pick up the tab when somebody makes a mistake, and so it could pose a threat to the public safety, or it creates serious liabilities for local government as well. So not only does an RBO ensure safe and professional construction done by skilled workers on and skilled crafts people on all projects, it tends to increase the likelihood that local contractors will be used and employ local workers. People love to talk about local workers, local contractors, which obviously lowers unemployment in that area, and it means that more money circulates through that local government. When people are working there and getting paid there, they're spending money there. So, an RBO serves as sort of an insurance policy for local governments by establishing these clear criteria. So, I have some of this spelled out in this PowerPoint. Let's see. Here we go. So, it's not letting me go forward. Of course.
Can you use your
There we
keyboard?
go. There we go. Got it. So basically, what is responsible bidding? The laws require state and local governments to award contracts to what I described just a second ago to the lowest responsible bidder. But the responsible part of it is not well defined in the procurement code. So we like to put things in place for local governments to spell that out themselves. We have a cute little video. It's a whiteboard. We have it on our website and we can share it later, but it sort of explains how it spells that out. So basically, what does responsible mean? Obviously, we know the lowest bidder is not always the most responsible bidder. Public bodies can choose a bidder other than the lowest bidder as a selection as far as like in public interest, without fraud, favoritism, and there's a reasonable basis for the award. The lowest responsible bidder does not mean strictly the lowest amount or the dollar amount. It's definitely the lowest responsible bidder is who is the most capable of doing the work in satisfactory manner, like I said earlier, in budget, on time, and without any incident of workers getting hurt or not being paid the proper rate. So this basically what we're doing today is focusing on setting aside responsible bidder standards as they pertain to local government and just again public works contracts. Local bodies can adopt an RBO to define what constitutes as what they believe as a responsible bidder. This the RBOs that the template that we have in place establishes verifiable standards and strictly objective criteria to ensure that a public body is employing only quality contractors. This to me sounds like a silly question, but people ask this a lot. Are RBOs legal? Yeah, for sure. Obviously, public bodies have a wide discretion in choosing the lowest responsible bidder. The templates that we have been put together by our team of attorneys who specialize in labor law, and there's never been a question of whether or not what we have in place is legal or not, and we've got case law and all of that to back that up. So winning a contract shouldn't be expected just because a contractor has the lowest amount and that's how it's spelled out. putting together this stuff sort of separates and allows the public body their own discretion because it takes away any kind of due process for the losing bidder. Because if there were criteria spelled out perfectly and clearly in the bidding, they're not going to, if you have 10 items that you have to meet, even to bid, you have to submit 10 pieces of certifications or whatever it is, and you only submit eight, you are now non-responsive, and the public body is no longer liable for trying to prove any kind of ambiguous, they didn't do the right work at so and so's place or whatever. They had to meet these number of criteria to be able to even bid on it, so they can basically bounce somebody just based on the information, whether or not they submitted it on time. Our model RBO has a number of criteria. I won't go through it all, but basically proof that a bidder is licensed to do business in the state. It says that they have to disclose any federal, state, or local tax liens or delinquencies in the last 5 years, proof of workers' comp, statement of compliance with the Prevailing Wage Act, should that apply, copy of the Substance Abuse Prevention Program, basically making sure, this is also under the Illinois Procurement Code, but making sure a statement that individuals who will perform any work on the project will be properly classified as either employees or independent contractors, proof of any professional trade licenses, disclosure of any suspensions or revocation of licenses over the last 5 years. But most importantly, one thing that we like to hone in on and sort of sets aside a local entity, a public body, is saying that evidence of participation in apprenticeship and training programs that are approved and registered through the U.S. Department of Labor for all crafts to be performed on the project. That is just ensuring that you get the most skilled and knowledgeable workers performing the work on your taxpayer-funded projects. So it asks for name and experience of project managers and superintendents and licensing of all those people that will be involved in the project, and proof that all workers expected to work on the project have completed OSHA training. Obviously, anybody would want that, so there are no incidents of anybody getting hurt or worse. It also asks for surety coverage from the Department of Treasury, list of projects of similar size and scope that the bidder has performed in the last 3, possibly even 5 years, depending on the size and scope of the project being billed or bidded. They have to provide any additional information or verification at any request from the public body as well. So, as I mentioned a little bit ago, incomplete submissions basically deem the bidder non-responsive. So, a bidder must comply with the submission requirements no later than the time of the bid opening. Submissions deemed inadequate or incomplete or untimely may result in the rejection of the bid, which is, again, sort of the policy that protects the public body from rejecting a lowest bid, because if they didn't fill out or submit the proper information on time or as required, then they didn't meet the requirements, period, and they can be rejected. So, all public bodies reserve the right to utilize the information provided by the contractor or subcontractors and any information obtained through its own independent verification. And they have the sole authority to determine whether the bidder is responsive and responsible. This also applies to all subcontractors that will perform work on any of the projects under a GC or a prime. So the prime bidder has to disclose all the subcontractors, the name of each and every one of them, and as well as any independent contractors prior to commencing work. The subcontractors must meet all of the same requirements as the prime, and they have to submit their documents to the prime, and the prime is in charge of submitting those documents to the public body. And then to take it even further, payment can be withheld from any subcontractor who fails to abide by or comply with the responsibility status. Failure of a subcontractor to submit the required documents also the successful does not disqualify the successful prime bidder. However, it will disqualify the subcontractor to perform the work. And they may ask for a change of that or to replace that specific contractor. There are other provisions in here that just get a little more technical, like the severability, that's all legal terms for me, conflicting ordinances or procurement policies. If another ordinance or provision conflicts with the RBO, this RBO would prevail if enacted. Um, Public records, all information submitted by the successful bidder and or the subcontractors are pursuant to the RBO, including certified payroll public records subject to the Illinois FOIA. One of the questions we get all the time is whether or not an RBO would increase the cost of a project. So we have studies with our Illinois Economic Policy Institute that show responsible bidder ordinances or protection plans for the taxpayers, providing the highest value at no extra cost. There's no evidence that RBO provisions raise the construction cost. Again, with public works construction in the state of Illinois, if the Prevailing Wage Act applies, if prevailing wage applies to a project, the rate should be the same on any contractor performing work for any classification. The material costs are what they are. So if there's any differential in a bid from, if the bid is $1 million, the next bid is $200,000 higher. There shouldn't be a huge discrepancy between bids because costs are what they are. So if everybody's following the same rules and the playing field is actually level, there shouldn't be a huge differential between any other bids. So obviously this shouldn't increase any cost because the rates are what they are. We have a bunch of studies that can back this up. Cost overruns caused by non-responsible contractors, however, are very common and publicized and can be devastating to public budgets. Again, if an injury were to happen on your public project, obviously, taxpayers have to fund all of that. If the project takes too long because it wasn't performed by skilled workers, obviously that costs money. So it is more likely for a project to cost more without having these things in place in the bidding process. Another question we get is, do RBOs decrease competition? Again, we have studies to show that the impact of responsible bidder ordinances on bid competition and public construction cost are actually increased bid competition by an average of 8% in Illinois and Indiana. And it doesn't limit any bidders to in-state contractors. However, again, there are so many benefits to local hire and supporting the local economy that, it is what it is. If the out-of-state contractor follows all of the rules and all of the laws and can meet all of the requirements, there's no reason why they couldn't bid and or perform the work. Again, we focus pretty heavily on apprenticeship and training. Basically, we want to make sure that all the work that is funded by taxpayers is obviously done on time and under budget, but also by the most skilled workers possible. The apprenticeship and training matter is, when you're working with apprentices, they're earning while they're learning. You're forwarding the middle class income. You're making sure that people working on these jobs are getting paid right and they have health insurance and a pension plan. We do ask for graduation requirements, basically just to show that contractors are actively participating in programs that they're graduating with with proof of graduation and proof of the active participation, and not just saying, oh, there are other programs out there where people can basically just get a uh, certificate saying that they're part of a larger organization that trains people. So people think this is a non-union and a union issue, but the USDOL does approve joint labor management programs, employer-sponsored programs, as well as programs in organizations such as contractors associations and community colleges, which would all fly under the RBO requirements. So it's not necessarily a union or non-union issue. And if you have any questions, we can follow up. We also have a group of attorneys and field staff they're always available to help write or kind of making sure that you get what you need if a public body is looking for a specific type of requirement um, or wanting an RBO to be worded a certain way. So we have plenty of people in place that can help put these together for any municipality out there. So if you have any questions, we can give you all of our information.
Great. Thank you, Jodi. Great presentation. We did have one question for you related to RBOs, and I'm not sure if you know this question, but when does delinquency of health and welfare like pension, et cetera, payable to trade unions come into play, if at all, or does that not matter with like RBOs? Um, does it fall under independent verification by the public body? It's not obviously like the best interest of taxpayers issue per se, but shows responsibility at leveling the playing field.
Yeah, I would say it does show responsibility. As far as delinquency to a specific organization, I think it would kind of be a case by case basis. I don't know that that would necessarily be a deal breaker, or it's not necessarily spelled out. I mean, it could be if you're a public body looking for that. So,
Yeah, but that's definitely not like a requirement in any of the RBOs that are
not
out there
necessarily,
currently.
no.
Yeah.
No. I mean, any of the delinquency language is geared more towards like tax liens and stuff like that that would actually, you know, I think as far as to a specific organization, it might be something that the public body would be interested in knowing, and hopefully that organization could work that out with the specific contractor.
Yep. Please drop any more questions you have. We could stick on for another couple minutes, but for everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. Um, the chat is open, the Q&A is open. Thank you again to all of our presenters, Cassie, Sarah, and Jodi. Great presentations. Like I said, I will send out all of the presentations in an email, and then we have this recorded. We will put it on our website. So if you would like to view it later, but everyone, thank you so much for joining today. And I don't see any more questions coming in. I'm glad the chat is working. I'm so sorry about that earlier.
Hey Jill, just give me 20 more seconds. I want to drop a couple of the links in the chat just in case
Perfect.
people don't want to wait for the um, slides to come through.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Sarah's dropping some stuff in. So please, great resources for you to click on and look at now or later.
Thank you, Sarah.
And I'll re-put in my email address just in case people joined after. But yeah, please feel free to reach out on any of that information.
Great. All right. Well, not seeing any more questions, so I think this concludes the webinar, and I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you everyone for joining, and thanks to our great panelists. So
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
everyone.
have a
Bye.
good rest of
Enjoy
your
the
day, everyone.
sunshine.